الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. Today, I think we start from التشهد الأول. So we'll continue inshallah ta'ala within the course of Fiqh Hanbali, and we'll be talking about, we're still within the Kitab al-Salah. The reason I like Zad al-Mustaqna', specifically out of all the Hanbali mutun, is that it may not be perfectly organized. Like Abu Shuja' is much superior, within Fiqh Shafi'i, is superiorly organized. And within Fiqh Hanbali, there are other mutun that are superior in terms of organization. He says, Zad al-Mustaqna', Imam al-Hajjawi, he would go through how to do stuff. He would just say, do this. Here's the sequence. Stand like this, put your hand like that. He doesn't talk about, like he does that first, and then he tells you, here's the arkan, here's the wajibat, but he tells you how to do it first. So he gives you a little bit of a sense of like how to stand, where to put your feet. You don't get that from the other books, like when you study Abu Shuja' and Fiqh Shafi'i. He doesn't tell you how the Shafi'is like you to stand at the beginning, where to put your hands. He just says, here's the obligations, here are the sunnahs, here are the invalidators. Like that's what goes through that basic stuff, which I like, but it doesn't give a Muslim sometimes the sense of how to do stuff in depth. And I like Zad because it does that. And that's why I chose it out of the different Hanbali texts that we could have studied. In retrospect, maybe I should have chosen something different, but I like Zad al-Mustaqna'. I enjoy it, because when I was younger and I studied it for the first time, it told me how to do, and that's how my brain works. I'm like, you can talk to me about the arkan and the wajibat later. Just tell me how to do it, and so tell me where do you want me? How do you want me to stand? Where do you want my hands? Like I want to hear that as a kid, and then you can tell me, okay, which of this stuff is obligatory, which of it is not that big a deal. I'll find out about that later. Other people like to know what they have to do and what they shouldn't, but I like to know how to do things first, and that's the value I find in Zad al-Mustaqna'. So you put up with the difficulty of Bab al-Tahara in Zad al-Mustaqna', where it goes off into scenario after scenario of menstruation and all these other stuff that we don't fully even comprehend. Most of it is outdated because of medicine today not really allowing for most of these scenarios to exist. But you get what you reap in terms of fruits is you get the proper kind of explanation of how to pray and how to do things appropriately. All right. So we've arrived at the tashahhud al-awwal, the first tashahhud. We talked about this last week. We went through the actual wording of the tashahhud last week. And then he says, يقول المصنف رحمه الله تعالى يعني ثم يقول اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وآل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. So I think something's missing in this. So I think an important piece here is that in salah, you shouldn't add anything to the wordings of what you say. So in salah specifically, you say Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad in salah. You just keep the name as it is. Outside of salah, I don't think it's appropriate, except in specific situations. And then when you speak of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, you should add something. Nabiyyina, Rasulina, Sayyidina, Qudwatina, Mawlana, whatever you want to use outside of salah. I think that's the appropriate way to do, because he is alayhi salatu wasalam of that status to us. In salah, no. In salah, you say it as you were taught to say it, and because you're in an act of worship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you should not be praising anyone with anything aside from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I think that's the proper way to do this. I'm just saying that Wallahu is the appropriate manner. So in salah, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim. Outside of salah, you can add whatever it is that you want to add in praising him alayhi salatu wasalam. But out of respect for the sanctity of salah and the sanctity of that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you should be very, very specific with following the rules, following the wording. Just say it as it was narrated. Wallahu a'lam. All right. ويستعيذ من عذاب جهنم وعذاب القبر وفتنة المحيا والممات ومن فتنة المسيح الدجال ويدعو بمورد. Recommended to seek protection from the punishment of Jahannam, the punishment of the grave, the difficulties or the trial of life and death, and the fitna of the Antichrist or Masih al-Dajjal. And this comes actually from a narration from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. It's an actual hadith where the Prophet alayhi salatu would say at the end of the salah, and this is something I do, and it's very, after you're done your salawat al-Ibrahimiyya, when you're done, innaka hamidun majid, you're done, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min adhabi jahannama wa min adhabi al-qabr من فتنة المحيا والممات ومن شر فتنة المسيح الدجال. And then you can go ahead and you can end your salah, because ورد عن النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام, there's actual narration that the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام did that. Salah, within it, a lot of it is going to be based on narrations, whatever narrations you. And the Hanabila are very strong on that. The other schools of jurisprudence don't follow that as much. They have a different philosophy or different usul al-fiqh and how they follow it. But the Hanabila, they look for narrations. Any narration they find where someone points out he said something alayhi salam in a certain way, they will for sure stick to it. And I like that within salah. I think that's a good approach for salah in general. One may then supplicate using any transmitted supplication. It is actually recommended that after, like at the end of the last tashahhud, once you've said that, to make dua that transmitted du'as or supplications. Anything that was transmitted from the Prophet ﷺ that he used to say, you can just say it. It doesn't have to be that he said it in that time. But if you want to make a dua, use a dua that he said alayhi salatu wasalam. If you want to make a dua of something, it's sunnah to actually take a little bit of time and make dua. But not to the point, if you're praying imam, that people behind you start to get antsy. So be very careful when you're leading prayer, how much time you spend. And he does a little bit of an explanation here. Again, the explanation you see in English up here. This is the translation of Al-Rawd al-Murbi', which is the text that explained Zad. Al-Rawd al-Murbi' was written by Imam Buhuti. So he's a Hanbali Imam who explained Zad al-Mustaqna'. So Musa Ferber, what he did is he actually didn't really translate Zad al-Mustaqna'. He translated the explanation of it in certain points, which makes the translation that you see up here not actually verbatim from what's being said in the text. It's more the translation of the. It's good for you if you don't read Arabic much, because it gives you like a more in-depth explanation for what's being said. But I'm not going to go over it because that's not the point. That's not the purpose of this study. The purpose of this course is just a primary text study. So I'm not going to actually go through everything he says in the explanation. You can read it if you want to benefit from it. If you're not, then just whatever I'm talking about is what you're going to be held to on the exam. ثم يسلم عن يمينه السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وعن يساره كذلك, as we do salah. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله on one side, السلام عليكم ورحمة الله on the other side. And I don't think he puts this there. But the way you would move your head is a little bit of a tilt. So it's a movement, it's also a tilt. So it's not like this. It's not like this. It's something in the middle. So you're looking, but you're also tilting down. You're looking, you're tilting down. Where are your eyes? Usually your eyes are on those who are around you. The concept of Assalamu alaikum is actually to the people who are around you. You're not giving salams to some imaginary thing on your shoulder, which what you were told as a kid. You give salams to the malaika on your shoulders. No, you're actually giving salams to the people. So when you're praying, jama'ah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Imam is doing to the mu'min, and the mu'min are doing it to each other. They're giving salams to whoever's on their right or on their left. So your eyes don't have to be Assalamu alaikum down. It's Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to whoever's on either side. Just so that's understood. وإن كان في ثلاثية أو رباعية نهض مكبرا بعد التشهد الأول وصلى ما بقي كالثانية بالحمد فقط ثم يجلس في تشهده الأخير متوركا. If one's prayer consists of 3 or 4 cycles, or rak'at, he means here, one rises saying Allahu Akbar after the first tashahhud and prays the remainder like the second prayer cycle, reciting only al-Fatiha, meaning there's no surah. So again, if you're praying 4, the first 2 will have a surah after al-Fatiha, the second 2 will not. If you're praying Maghrib, the first 2 will have a surah, the third one will not. Fajr only 2, for both of them have a surah within them. Then sits in the final tashahhud with his left foot under his right shin and his right foot raised. So this is called tawarruk. So when I pointed out last week the different ways to sit, there was one that I left until the end, which is called tawarruk. The Shafi'iyya and the Hanabila specifically, and even the Hanafiyya have it in it, I believe. They have it. The Hanafiyya have it as well. The Malikiyya do and don't, depending on which book you read. Have this at the end of Salah, right? So the tawarruk is like this. So again, if iftirash is basically like this. Oh my God. Oh, this volleyball is not agreeing with my knees. Oh my gosh. So this is iftirash. This is standing up, and I'm sitting on my left, or I can do the other way around. Also iftirash. Also acceptable, right? And then the third one, wallahu a'lam, is this. Some scholars will argue it's this instead. I don't agree with that argument. I think it's very weak, and I think it's the other one that's acceptable. So I think this is the acceptable one. Wallahu a'lam, there is some controversy here. I will point that out in a later lecture, inshallah ta'ala. Tawarruk, which happens at the end of salah, the last tashahhud before you do salam alaikum wa rahmatullah, is like this. This guy stands up, and this one, he comes right through. And then you sit on your buttocks like this. This is tawarruk. So you can see my left foot coming out and my right foot standing up. This is called tawarruk. You can't do this. Al-wirk is basically your pelvis. So tawarruk is where you're kind of sitting on your pelvis. This only happens in the last tashahhud. And you have to be imam or praying alone. Do not attempt this as a ma'moom, because you'll sit on top of the person beside you for sure. The only time you can do this as a ma'moom, as a follower, is if everyone is doing it. If everyone is doing it, so everyone kind of tilts a little bit to the left, then it works out. Otherwise, you just do it iftirash, normal iftirash in your final. But if you're imam, you should do it that way. The reason I don't do it is because it is very painful to the knees, and I just can't. I'm just doing this to show you. For me, it's just way too painful for me. But that's what you should do, and that's a sunnah for most of the madahib. It's not just for it's not just for the Hanabila. The majority of it do it at the end. Yeah. This is the one where you're going to say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah within. No. No. It does not ruin your salah by any means. It does not ruin your salah. Which is why. So that's where when we talk about the arkan and the wajibat and the sunan, we'll talk. This is coming next. This is coming. He'll talk what the obligations are. He'll tell you what if you do wrong will cause invalidation. This is just explaining. Here's how to do it optimally without specifying what you cannot drop and what you can drop. So I know it should be done the other way, but I like that because it does that. It tells us how to do things without going into the details you're asking. But it's going to tell us these details a little bit. We'll probably start it today, but if not next week, he'll start talking about the obligations, the arkan, the wajibat, the sunan, and the mubtilat for sure. Okay. والمرأة مثله لكن تضم نفسها وتسدل رجليها في جانب يمينها. So he does talk about. I wasn't sure if he had talked about the ladies. I talked about this last week, but I'll just read it quickly. A woman is like a man when it comes to prayer, except that she bunches herself together and sits with her legs underneath her slightly to the right. If there is an unrelated male stranger who can hear her, it is obligatory for her to conceal her recitation so that only she can hear it. Then it is recommended to ask Allah for forgiveness 3 times by saying, did I miss the? No, I don't think so. Yeah, okay. I think this is from the this is translation of the explanation. So this is not. So for a lady, same thing. It's just that when she's praying, when she makes sujood, she's not stretched out as much. She's a little bit coming together. And in ruku', same thing. She's not stretched out as much. She's a little bit coming together. And when she's doing julus, she doesn't necessarily have to do it as exactly the way I did it. She can do it with her legs a little bit to the right, like just where she's kind of sitting on them to the right. That's acceptable as well. And it all comes down to whether she's praying in a place where men have a lot of access or walking from behind her, like in the haram, for example. Wherever you pray, there's men everywhere and people. So, but here, when you're praying at the back, really, there's no one seeing from the behind because there's a wall, so you're a bit more safe to pray however you want. And then when the salah is over, you say Astaghfirullah al-Azim alladhi la ilaha illa huwa al-hayy al-qayyum wa atubu ilayh, or just Astaghfirullah once, 3 times is enough. اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام تباركت يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. And اللهم أعنا على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. All these ad'iyah are ma'thura. The Prophet ﷺ would say them after salah. It's a sunnah to say them. And to repeat and to say Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Wallahu Akbar, each one 3 times, 33 times. I mean, Subhanallah 33 times, Alhamdulillah 33 times, and Allah Akbar 33 times, and then La ilaha illallah at the end. And then reciting Surah Ayat al-Kursi and Surah al-Ikhlas or al-Mu'awwidhatayn. These are all sunnahs the Prophet ﷺ did on and off throughout his life. I would say choose a regimen that you can become comfortable with, something that's not too, maybe do it for Tazkiyah, for example, something that's not too long, something that you can probably stick to and just repeat them after salah. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly the same amount. Try to build up to it with your life, but I mean, at least start with something so that after salah, it's not any break off with nothing. At least you're saying Astaghfirullah 3 times. Have a little bit of a wird that you do after your prayer, and then with time, look in the sunnah, see what the Prophet ﷺ would say it on and off, and try to add to them. And then you add ad'iyah and you add other stuff, and slowly, it becomes more. Your ritual becomes more of a ritual. Like your ritual of salah becomes more of a ritual after it as well. You take a moment for yourself too. All right. So what is offensive, permissible, recommended, or invalidated in the prayer? So here's where we start talking about the actual breakdown of stuff, right? And this is important. So he's going to start with the qara. ويكره في الصلاة التفاته ورفع بصره إلى السماء وتغميض عينيه وإقعاؤه وافتراش ذراعيه ساجدا what's the word here? وعبثه وتخصره وتروحه وفرقعة أصابعه وتشبيكها وأن يكون what is this word here? حاقنا وبحضرة طعام يشتهيه وتكرار الفاتحة لا جمع سور في فرض كنفل. Okay, so this is just bad resolution. I don't memorize the mutun by heart. But he's talking about the makruhat. Makruhat meaning what is unrecommended but does not invalidate your salah. Right? What is unrecommended, what does not invalidate your prayer when you do it. So these are important for the Hanabila because they go into a little bit more detail than maybe other madhab do. So he talks about number one, iltifatuhu, which is to turn one's face away from the direction of prayer in salah. So iltifat fi salah, this is makruh. It's mubtil when your whole body turns. Right? It invalidates when your whole body turns for no, and there's no darura for it. Like there was no darura where someone's falling over or something. So if you just got distracted or something happened. So if your whole torso moves in a full direction, then that can cause invalidation. But if for your face to turn, you're praying, and then you look like this, this is makruh fi salah. So you should not do that. Obviously, your face should stay towards al-qibla at all times. وَرَفْعُ بَصَرِهِ إِلَى السَّمَاء, raising one's gaze to the sky. You should not be looking up in salah, especially people do this when they come up from sujood. They come up from sujood, or they come up from ruku'ah. سَمِعَ اللَّهُ رَبَّنَا وَلَكَ الْحَمْدُ. I don't know why. Why you no? There's no. You come up, your head stays in a state of equilibrium, and you're looking down to your masjid, to the place where you perform your sujood. وتغميض عينيه, and closing one's eyes. So closing one's eyes is an issue of difference of opinion within the different madhahib. Right? It's not something that's fully agreed upon. For the Shafi'is, for example, Imam al-Nawawi doesn't see it to be makruh. The madhab is that it's makruh, but he doesn't see it to be that case, and his opinion here is actually more correct. In the Hanbali madhab, for the life of me, I can't remember what breakdown they have on this issue outside of this. Like who else from the scholars have a different opinion? But I do know that within the Hanbali madhab, there's a second opinion that does not see it to be makruh, especially when it's aiding your salah. If it's an aid, yani if you are praying and with your eyes open, you are being distracted by something that is not dangerous. Meaning the concept of prayer, you're not supposed to be disconnected from the world. Now you're still a part of the world. You're just focused. Right? It's not the concept of disconnection. It's a concept of being focused. They're two different things. Salah is not a disconnection. Salah is a focused state. And I think that's a huge differentiation when scholars of Tazkiyah talk about all the time. That when you close your eyes, you disconnect. That's not what Salah is for. It's not a disconnection. You can have a disconnection in life at some points. You can go do that. You can if you need it, you can seek it out and disconnect yourself for a little bit. But Salah in its own essence is not a disconnection. It's a focus. It's a heightened focus state. So that's why that closing the eyes is not recommended. You're not told to do it. If it was a disconnection, you would have been recommended to close your eyes. But you were never recommended. If anything, it's disrecommended to close your eyes. But it doesn't invalidate your prayer. However, if you're praying and you're distracted, because, for example, let's say you're praying up here in Taraweeh, and Abdullah Sulaiman or Usama or Muhammad are fiddling with the sound system because it is literally nuclear science to get a sound system to work in any masjid in the world. So you need 5 people to work on the thing. So the guy who's standing right here is going to be trying to focus, but people are going back. So closing your eyes is actually a good thing. Like it's not a bad thing. It helps you focus a little bit. But it's not something that you should get into the ongoing habit of, right, all the time. I struggled with this because when I recited Taraweeh, it happened naturally. Like when I'm reading as an imam, I close my eyes. It just happened. And then when I studied, I tried to change it, and oh my God, it was very difficult. Because the moment I open my eyes, I have a 5-year-old ADHD brain. Like the moment I open my eyes, I am thinking of it, and I lose whatever ayat I'm reading. So the only I have to close my eyes so I can see the page and just read from what I know. Again, when it's purposeful, it's not a problem. When it's non-purposeful, it's unrecommended to do so. I just want to give you the breakdown of kind of why. So to sit on the back of one's ankles. So al-iqa is what I was trying to point out to you as being, there's one of 2 things that are seen to be unrecommended. So is this sitting on the ankles or is this sitting on the ankles? And for the life of me, I don't think either of them are. And I don't know which one actually is. So it's hard to figure out exactly what's meant by this. And when you say the ankles, that's one translation of it. Some of them talk about not sitting on your heels. And because that translation has some merit to it and it's clearer, this is sitting on your heels for sure. This is not sitting on your heels. Here you're kind of sitting. You're sitting on the palm of. You're kind of sitting on the sole of your foot way more. Not really sitting on your ankles. And your ankles here aren't really touching the ground. So it's an ongoing argument. So people go both ways. I don't tell people. I grew up in a place where sitting with your feet standing up was always, the scholars I brought me up frowned on it, and I frowned on it. It just looks very weird to me. Even though I understand there is merit to the argument of using it. But what's manhi anhu, what is recommended is al-iqa'. That's the word for it. It's just iqa'. Defining it, there's different definitions. Like what exactly was meant here. Iqa' is the way a dog sits. If you want like the detailed arguments, the way the dog sits. How does a dog sit? I don't know. Like how do we draw the analogy of how? Remember I told you like when it comes to going down from standing to going down. So the Prophet ﷺ said, don't go down like a camel. How does a camel go down when I draw the analogy to myself? So some scholars said, don't go down with your hands first. Some said, don't go down with your knees first. So you have both of them. I think it's just don't go down in a clumsy, clunking way that wakes up people in the house, like where you're just falling down and slamming the ground. Wallahu alam. But the same thing, don't sit like a dog. I think the Sahaba understood what was meant because their Arabic was a little bit more fresh. Like it was probably something that was culturally but much more clear to them than it is to us. So I don't know exactly what it is. The same thing goes for words like qaza, for example, when it comes to the hair. This is a term that they understood. We don't fully understand. Like we don't have, like there's 3 different definitions to this word that none of them are authentic. So it's hard to figure out like so when you don't have a good definition of a word, the problem becomes is that when someone defines it, then they give a ruling based on the definition. And if they fail to point out that another definition exists that would turn into a different ruling, you end up having 2 kind of opposing parties that think they're doing the right thing. And they think the other one's completely wrong. Where it's really not that. It's really just a lack of clarity of what the definition is here. Wallahu alam. وَافْتِرَاشُ ذِرَاعِهِ, to sit on, so to place all of one's forearms on the ground when prostrating. So to put all of your hand down on the ground when you're prostrating as a man, it should be a little bit up, right? It's the palms of the hands that are on the ground. For a man, the hands are not touching the ground. For a woman, she can touch the ground for sure. Her full forearm can be on the ground. For a man, it shouldn't. وَعَبَثُهُ, which is to fidget. So fidgeting, like with your pockets, with your lihya, with your people sit down and just they twist the hairs of their lihya. Wallahi, I did this. I came to Salli and someone was playing with it and I slapped them on their hand. Just put it down. You're going like this. Like, you're ruining your salah. This is a fidgeting. Like don't fidget. Don't fidget in salah. So be careful of fidgeting with stuff in salah. Purposeful movements are different. I'll talk about them inshallah next week. Purposeful movements are different. Fidgeting is where it's not purposeful. Like if you're standing there and you have an itch that by God is going to drive you up the wall if you don't scratch it, then you go ahead and scratch it. But it's the idea of just ongoing. These movements here, these are completely useless. They don't do anything. They're not necessary. Then that fidgeting you shouldn't do. And if you do more than 3 consecutively, then there is a high possibility of that being an invalidation. And we're going to talk about that, and it's going to come very soon. Just be careful of abath. وَتَخَصُّرُهُ, placing one's hands on both hips when you're praying. So this is not, we don't have that, but that's not acceptable in salah. It doesn't invalidate the prayer. It's makruh. To pop one's knuckles. And to interlace one's fingers, right? So this is not. This is makruh in salah. Okay. Like this is not. Popping your knuckles. That's also makruh in salah. Dropping your mic in the middle of a salah when people can't hear in the other room. Probably one of the biggest problems we have. Okay. وأن يكون حاقنا, and it's offensive to pray while needing to urinate or in the presence of food while one desires it. Right? So if you have to go to the bathroom, you should go to the bathroom and then go pray. Right? So and if there's food, and this is a little bit of you have to understand the meaning here. If it's maghrib, no, then you should pray first. Right? This is another kind of misunderstanding of the text. So you'll read this text and think, okay, then at futur time, then we should eat first and then pray maghrib next. No. This is when it's a sunnah prayer. It's when it's a sunnah prayer. Or a prayer that has a muwassa' time. The Hanabila believe in a muwassa' in times where for a salah you have a long time, and then other salah don't. Fajr and Maghrib, they don't have a long time. Fajr and Maghrib are very short time. So both, for the Hanbalis, you should pray immediately, right? So even if there's food there, you should pray and then eat. But for example, in Dhuhr, if Dhuhr, there's 5 hours of Dhuhr, for example, in the summer. And if food is there after then you can eat first, and then you can pray Dhuhr afterwards, because there's a muwassa' time that has no this recommendation in terms of praying it at that time. But for Maghrib and Fajr, for example, you shouldn't. And it's offensive to repeat al-Fatiha within a single prayer cycle. It's not offensive to combine several surahs in an obligatory prayer or in a voluntary prayer. So repeat Fatiha as in if I were to recite Surah al-Fatiha, and in Maghrib, for example, in another hour, Ameen, and then the surah I decide to read is Surah al-Fatiha. That's makruh. I shouldn't do that. I should choose a different surah. All right? It doesn't invalidate the prayer, but I shouldn't do it. But you can add different prayer. You can combine different surahs in a prayer. Like I can read a Shams in al-Layl, for example, in a salah, or I can recite the end of one surah and the beginning of another one. That's all fine. There's no karaha in any of that. Whether it's a obligatory salah like Maghrib or it's a voluntary salah like Tarawih, makes no difference. But it's makruh to recite Fatiha and then right after that to recite Fatiha again, unless that's the only surah you know. Right? Unless some people, for converts, that actually becomes important. They can do that for sure. A convert can recite, if they're praying Asr alone, they can recite the Fatiha and then recite the Fatiha again as their surah, because they don't know anything else. But once they learn something else, they shouldn't do it twice in a row. Again, none of this invalidates. None of this invalidates. Like if you do it, your salah is fine. You don't have to repeat it. But they're just makruh. وله رد المار بين يديه وعد الآي والفتح على إمامه ولبس الثوب ولف العمامة وقتل حية وعقرب وقمل فإن أطال الفعل عرفا من غير ضرورة ولا تفريق بطلت ولو سهوا. A few more scenarios here about what he thinks is acceptable. So some of this will be applicable and some of this won't. One may, and it's recommended to repel someone who passes in front of them while praying. I put, I think, a slide here, did I? Yes, I did. So I put the 3 different aqwal here because it's important. When it comes to stopping someone who is walking, I'll translate this later, inshallah. I was just too lazy to do it last night. So when someone, if you're praying and you have a sutra, for example, this is a sutra. So if I'm praying and someone comes to walk between, there are 3 different opinions on this, on what to do at that moment. All right. The first opinion is that it's acceptable, it's permissible to put your hand and ask them not to walk by, and it's better not to. And that is that's the Hanafi madhab, right? So the Hanafis actually, no, for the Hanafis, it's actually recommended not to leave them alone, not to do anything. That's the recommended opinion in the Hanafi madhab. But you're allowed to put your hand, but it's not recommended to do so. The second one is that it's mustahab. It is recommended to put your hand out, and that's one of the opinions of the Hanafi madhab. It's one of the opinions. It's the way the Malikis see it. It's the way the Shafi'i see it, and it's one of the ways it's one of the opinions in the Hanbali madhab. And the third opinion is that you must do it, and that is the Hanbali madhab, and it's one of the opinions of the Shafi'i madhab, that you have to push them. That does not include praying within the lines of prayer. So when we're filling up the masjid, and someone, for example, at the end over there loses their wudu or has to go to the bathroom, they can walk. No one should. They can walk back and forth multiple times. It's fine. That shouldn't be. That's not a problem at all. That's actually completely fine. So within the lines of salah, people can go back and forth. So you don't have to wait. So if you're sitting at the end and you're gonna, you get up and you walk. It's when I'm standing here and praying, and there's many other places for you to walk, but you decide that you're going to walk right in front of me, between me and my sutra. And a sutra, and we'll talk about the sutra soon, which is like where it's something you put between yourself and others. So you can walk over there, it's fine. Sutra is just like is protecting a space for you to make your sujood and stuff. So the lines for the Malikis at least allow. I'll talk about this inshallah very soon. But if there's a lot of space and you just decide to walk here, then the majority of opinions that it's recommended or obligatory for you to put your hand out and ask them to stop. But you're allowed not to. But when we're talking about a place where there's lines and there's no way for you to get out of this place aside from walking, that's totally fine. Don't fight that. That's not okay. I had to explain this a couple of times last year, and still people didn't understand it. They were still fighting others. Like in the saf of salah, when it's in a masjid, that's different. You don't. So if you're standing in haram, for example, and praying, people will be walking in front of you the whole time. Like wherever you pray in haram, in any of the harams, you have no chance of not having people walking in front of you. But that's fine because the very long lines, there's nowhere else to go unless you end up praying really up front where no one's going to be moving. Aside from that, you're going to have people walking. It's not a problem. So I just want to point out it's in Arabic, but I'll try and translate it inshallah ta'ala. And if anyone wants to try and translate it for me, then God bless them. Wa'addul ay. So it's recommended to repel someone who passes and he says it's recommended. The actual opinion of the Hanbali madhab is that it's obligatory. right? This is an inferior opinion in the Hanbali method, but I didn't point it out because it's not really a big deal, and I don't think it's something that's worth the red alert slide. One may also count verses in Salah and the sayings of Subhanallah and Allahu Akbar for 8 prayers on his fingers, or may notify the Imam if he stalls or makes a mistake, or may put a needed garment, rewrap a turban, or kill a snake, scorpion, or lice. So if you're praying and you want to read, like for example, your intention is reading 10 ayat per rak'ah, then you can count them on your fingers in your salah. Just like if the Imam is doing Salat al-Eid, Allahu Akbar, you can count on your fingers. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. You can count just to keep so you don't lose track of them. That's fine. You can correct the Imam. He doesn't go into too much detail here, but that's the point that I think maybe is worthy of sharing with you. You can correct the Imam. There's conditions. Number one, there has to be an understanding between you and the Imam that that's going to happen. Like the Imam has to be someone who says, yes, correct me when I make a mistake. If the Imam is telling not to correct him when he makes a mistake, then you're only allowed to correct when the Imam makes a mistake that is going to invalidate Salah, that will invalidate his own prayer. Where he says something, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ لَهُمْ نَارُ جَهَنَّمْ, for example. Like he just completely, he says something that's the meaning of it is kufr. The meaning of it turns into kufr. The meaning, if you switch a word, qareeb to ba'id, for example, or kabir to saghir, but the meaning does not turn into kufr, you're fine. It's only when the wording becomes an act of kufr is where you have to correct your imam whether he likes it or not, whether he's okay with that or not. Aside from that, correcting the imam has to be something agreed upon between the imam and the ma'moom. It's something that's agreed upon. So, for example, I don't correct people here, and I ask people not to, in Salawat al-Mafruḍa throughout the year. Like in Isha and Fajr, I don't correct them. Like if they make a mistake or they drop something, unless the Imam is istaftah, which is the third situation. If the Imam makes it clear he wants help, like the Imam read the verse and stopped, and repeated it again and stopped. Like he knows a mistake happened, either in the verse he recited or he doesn't remember what's coming next and he's waiting for you to give, then you give it to him. Like the Imam will make it clear that he was asking for help. If the Imam is not asking for help, right, and he's not saying kufr, and there's no understanding to correct him, then you should not correct him. You should let him go, even if he makes a mistake in qira'ah. That's fine. This is not going to invalidate the prayer, and this is an issue of an agreement between the imam and ma'moom. On the other hand, for example, for tarawih, the understanding is if you're standing up there, we're going to correct every harf, every letter. Sometimes at ghunna, sometimes at tajweed. If you butcher the word bad enough, I will correct you. Like I'll make sure that, like if there's a qalqala that you have to make and you don't make it, I will point it out to you to make it again, to recite appropriately, because people are standing there with the musahaf open, they're trying to learn how to read. They're trying to keep track of stuff. So I don't want them to be thrown off if there's a waw and someone said a fa instead, or a fa, a waw. It's not some small, like وَكَانَ اللَّهُ when he said inna Allah kana. No, the person standing there who doesn't read Arabic really well is trying to keep up. You're making it very hard for them to keep up. So we have to correct them. In obligatory prayers, the agreement is not to. I personally don't mind it. Like if I'm reciting, go ahead, correct me anytime, any letter, go ahead and correct me. Actually, I'm happier that way. I don't like to be left because of the book of Allah. But for other people, I choose not to do that, and that's what we agreed to, because a lot of the people who actually lead prayer here are younger, and I want them to learn. I don't want them to stand there and be. Correction is like ever been tased? Yeah. Stand up here and make a mistake and have someone correct you. It's like you've been tased. Everything about you is just completely, it throws you off because it's very embarrassing, it's very hard, you lose track. So for someone who's young, who's learning, we don't need that unless they're saying kufr, unless they just said something that absolutely has to be corrected, or else the salah is going to be jeopardized in terms of its validity, then I just let it go. But in general, correcting the imam requires an agreement. Last piece, if you are praying at the end, you have no business correcting the imam at all. It's only the first 4 people standing behind him. That's it. No one else has any business correcting the imam, ever, when it comes to recitation stuff. Like even if it's not, unless it's kufr. Again, and that's very rare. For the imam to say something that is kufr, and for the 4 shuyukh behind him not to notice it was kufr, that is like very, very rare. Usually that's a prayer that has no barakah in it. You should probably just go pray somewhere else anyways. But in general, it's very rare. Aside from that, you shouldn't be correcting the imam from the. I remember we were praying at Al-Imam, this is 2017, I think, or 16. And Ahmed Wafi was reading Surah Al-Kahf. And he had that bad day, and the whole masjid was just having a riot. Everyone had a great time that day. Everyone, children, women, Wallah, there were ladies yelling from the back to correct him every time he made a mistake because I already knew the surah. And if there's this need for the nafs to want to correct, the nafs loves to correct. You learn things about your nafs if you watch your nafs. Your nafs loves to correct. If it's given the opportunity to correct someone, to show someone's wrong and that they got it right and that they know something, the nafs cannot resist it. It so wants to correct someone. So we had to actually stand up and say, Ya Jama'ah, Ana Hafidh and Fulan Hafidh, we have the Mus'haf open with us. We will correct him. You don't need the help of the entire masjid to correct this poor gentleman who's reciting Surah Al-Kahf. And that was a disastrous day for him. But but you have to watch out for it. Yes. If there's what? So it's best for you not to be the person responsible for that. I mean, having one of the mahram, having one of the men do it instead. But it's not invalidating of the prayer. And if it's arham, it's not a big deal. Like it's not, like again, it's not a red line that absolutely you can't do it. It's recommended that you don't do it. It's recommended that one of the men take them. But as long as it's your grandfather and your uncle and whatever, you can go ahead and continue to do that, inshallah. Yeah. But again, it's not a big deal. And then killing, rewrap a turban, like if the turban's falling off, and turbans were needed back then on the head, like it was a garment that was required, or if a piece of garment is falling off and your aura is going to be closed. So these type of things, these purposeful movements, these movements that have purpose to them, or killing a snake or something that's going to harm you or harm someone else. These are all purposeful movements you can do in salah. Purposeful movements in salah, very, very wide. Like there's a lot of flexibility. Non-purposeful movements in salah, very, very strict. Like you don't have a lot of flexibility with non-purposeful movements. Purposeful movements, you can do a lot of different things. You can hold a child, you can do a lot of different things that's needed for your life, or for the life, well-being of someone else, or the well-being of yourself, or your circumstances. There's a lot of flexibility there. And we'll talk about some of them as well. And he says if the action customarily considered prolonged, unnecessary, and uninterrupted, the prayer is invalid, even if it's done absent-mindedly. So if you're doing something that is not necessary, that is not productive, and is going on for a long time, like based on custom, this was a long time to, like someone scratched, right? Sometimes that's, so if someone just stood there and just scratched and scratched for like a good 15, 20, 30 seconds, that is considered amongst us to be very weird and not, then that can invalidate your prayer, even if it's done absent-mindedly. That's considered like he'll talk about this in more detail, like appropriately in a few more slides. But that can invalidate your prayer. So watch out for unpurposeful and unnecessary movements in your salah for sure. Be very careful with those. ويباح قراءة أواخر السور وأوساطها. It's permissible to recite from the end of a surah or the middle of a surah. At the beginning, reciting from a beginning is always acceptable, obviously. He's just saying that it's permissible to start from the middle of a surah somewhere at the end of it. It's all fine. That's all fine. وإذا نابه شيء سبح رجل وصفقت امرأة ببطن كفها على ظهر الأخرى ويبصق في الصلاة عن يساره والمسجد في ثوبه. If something occurs during prayer, like someone seeking permission to enter the prayer area or the imam omitting something, men say subhanallah and women clap the palm of one hand or the back of the other. So for a lady, if you're praying behind a man and the guy got up for a fifth rak'ah in Asr and you know it, she can say subhanallah if it's not being heard, but it's recommended that she hit her hand, and the man say subhanallah. Or if someone's trying to get in, and like you're standing in prayer, and you can see in perfectly that someone wants to come to the masjid, but it's unclear, you can say something like subhanallah to allow them to come in, or the imam can do that as well. It doesn't happen anymore, but I'm just saying that it's acceptable. Again, this is the examples of where you can communicate when appropriate and needed for the well-being of people who are praying or for the prayer area. During prayer, one spits to the left. Now you're saying spits? Why would we spit? Yeah, well, you don't live in Arabia. You don't live in the desert, so yeah. In Canada, I don't think I've spit once since I got here. Well, since I landed in Toronto, I don't think I've spit once. In Syria, you're spitting all the time because it's just a different climate and different humidity and different. You absolutely have to do it. So you have to make sure that there's a sunnah to doing it. You stand, you put your hand on your mouth, you look at the way you spit, and you make sure that you put your sandal on it so that it's not left on the ground observably to other people. And in salah, when they're praying in that climate, Sometimes they needed to do it. So if they were going to do it on your own, then you spit to your left. In the same, in the masjid, you don't spit on the ground. You spit inside your thobe, and then you clean it up later. And that's just because of a need, to do so. All right. Again, some of these examples are based on the culture or based on where you're living. So if you were to go and live in a part of Saudi Arabia for a couple of years and be out in the open, not in the takif. Again, a lot of people live in Saudi Arabia, they don't know this because they move from one place that has a mukayyif to another place that has a mukayyif. They don't actually, you have to go pray out in a masjid that doesn't have an actual wall, so it doesn't have an AC in it. And then you understand what I'm talking about, and this makes much more sense to you. وتسن صلاته إلى سترة قائمة كمؤخرة الرحل فإن لم يجد شاخصا فإلى خط. It is recommended to pray facing a barrier, which is what a sutra is, we talked about a second ago. Like the tail of a mount, when a fixed pole or stake is not found, one prays towards a crescent-shaped line or a line. So that's where this line is acceptable. So if I'm praying here, right, then that line over there becomes my becomes my sutra. And that's where the Hanbalis and the Malikis acceptable. The Shafi'is aren't okay with the line, nor are the Hanafis. They need an actual, they need something like this, like something standing up. Yeah, and then you have an opinion that I think is probably, as long as it's beyond where your masjid is. So where I'm praying, here's the farthest point where my sujood is going to be. So anything beyond that is fine, even if there's no sutra. Right? And that's probably the most reasonable opinion in general. Wallahu a'lam. So if you're standing praying there, and I'm standing here, you don't need a sutra, even if because I'm way too far away. But to have a sutra is sunnah. You should have a barrier if possible, and if nothing, then a line should suffice. وتبطل بمرور كلب أسود بهيم فقط. The prayer is invalidated by the passing of a completely black dog. And if it passes between the person, they go on all these different. So, and this is something that I should have made a slide for this. I want to make a slide to explain like what other. So there are opinions in other madhab on terms of what can cause you what can cause invalidation of your prayer in terms of what walks between you and your barrier. Again, this is something walking between you and your barrier. Beyond your barrier doesn't matter. But between you and your barrier, there were examples of different things that can invalidate your prayer. And there were certain like narrations that are weak that would point out like a certain if a lady who's on her period, for example, or if a certain type of this animal or this it can invalidate. None of that has any authenticity to it. The only thing that it does that has some authenticity is a black dog, and even that one it lacks full authenticity, and not all madhab have agreed to that. And I don't. This is an opinion that Hanbali madhab that I don't think is the correct one. I don't think anything that comes between you and your barrier will invalidate your prayer, regardless of what it is. But this is the only thing that the Hanbalis have, because they have a hadith that they think has reasonable authenticity and they think has and they're accepting of. But the different madhab have different opinion on this issue. Maybe I'll make a slide inshallah next time for you to put some stuff on it. But in general, my opinion on the matter is there's really nothing that comes between you and your barrier that will invalidate your prayer. I mean, it's not recommended. You can put your hand out, as we pointed out like a few minutes ago, to hold them back if you want. But even if they walk back, they're not going to invalidate your salah. Now you see why these things come up. Here's my theory. What I think these things come from is a few things. There's a few backgrounds here. Number one was the authenticity of that connection within salah, to lessen the amount of distractions that actually occur. So people should not be walking between you and your barrier. You should not, so that you can authenticity of prayer. Number two, so they talk about stuff that stand out, something that is very distracting, something that you don't see very often, that that will distract people. So a dog of a certain color comes by, you don't see a lot of those. It can make you scared because you're not sure what you're seeing. Could be like a panther, could be something. They had a lot of animals back then, so it can be very distracting. If a lady walks in front of you, the same thing for men. It can be distracting. So stuff like that is what I think the concept of a lot of these ideas came from. But I don't think from a fiqh perspective they actually invalidate your salah. Also, there was always some degree of superstition that existed before Islam about certain types of animals that I think found its way through some of the cultural, found its way through some of the fiqh opinions on certain matters. Certain animals with certain colors became bad omens, and people would get scared and feel uncomfortable around them. ولو تعوذوا عند آية وعيد والسؤال عند آية رحمة ولو في فرض. One may verbally seek protection at a verse containing threats and verbally ask for mercy at a verse of mercy, even in an obligatory prayer. For the Hanbalis, they're okay with you, when you're reciting in Salah, an ayah that talks about Jannah, to pause and make dua for Jannah. And an ayah talks about punishment, to pause and make dua for punishment. Seek refuge from punishment. Don't make dua for punishment. Seek refuge from punishment. Even in an obligatory prayer. Most madhahib aren't okay with it happening in an obligatory prayer. Right? They're okay with it in Taraweeh, for example. Taraweeh, very, very flexible. Taraweeh is sunnah, so we can do a lot. But in Isha, for example, they're not. Most madhahib aren't. The Hanbalis have the most flexible opinion on that matter, which I think is helpful. So you're not supposed to say it out loud. You pause and you say it, whisper it under your breath, but there's a pause. Oh, you can use your, no, you can, it's just like if I'm, for example, if I'm praying and I come by the ayah, جَنَّاتٍ تَجْرِي مِن تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارِ, I can pause, اللهم صل على اللهم صل على اللهم صل, and then continue reciting. I don't vocalize it in a so interesting you asked this question. so the Hanbalis, there's an opinion for them that is valid, that allow for the imam to do it out loud and for the mu'min to say Ameen with them. The opinion exists for them, and it's an acceptable and an opinion with merit. So they allow for that, and they allow for the imam to pause long enough for the imam ma'mum to know that this is no longer Quran, and to make a dua, Allahumma as'aluka, and the people say Ameen, then to continue afterward. But it's not the prominent opinion, and it's not the practiced one either. Like, it has no, I'm not aware of anywhere that's practiced, and I think it's for a good reason, because a lot of people don't know the Quran well enough to differentiate between what they're listening to. So, arkanuha. So now it goes into the arkan of salah, the stuff that you absolutely cannot miss, and if you do miss, then your salah is invalid, and you're required to go back and get them again. That's what rukn means. Rukn is something that you have to do. If you don't do, you have to go back and get done. You have to repeat, like, you have to go back to it and do it, or else your prayer will be invalid. That's what a rukn means, right? So you absolutely cannot miss it. Other things you can miss, and you can do sujood sahw, but rukn, you have to go back. You can't just say, oh, I'll just make up for it. No. You have to go back and get it. So if you missed it, you have to go back and do it again. القيام والتحريمة والفاتحة والركوع والاعتدال عنه والسجود على الأعضاء السبعة والاعتدال عنه والجلوس بين السجدتين والطمأنينة في الكل والتشهد الأخير وجلسته والصلاة على النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم فيه والترتيب والتسليم. So the essential elements of a prayer, rukn, the pillars are 14 for the Hanbalis. They're a little bit less for the Shafi'is. Number one, standing in an obligatory prayer for someone capable. So if you're capable of standing, you have to stand, if you're capable of doing it. If you cannot do it, then you're fined not to do it. Like, if you can't stand, you can't. So if you're someone who is sick and you can't, like, generally speaking, you find it difficult to stand, what's obligatory is that you do takbirat al-ihram standing up. And then you can sit for the remainder of your salah. So if you're someone who has arthritis or a bad back, or an older gentleman or an older lady who can't really stand, but she's able to stand up in general in her life. Like, in life, she's not sitting down all the time. Like, she's able to walk and stand up. Then she does takbirat al-ihram, or she does takbirat al-ihram standing up, Allahu Akbar. And then you can sit down and continue the prayer in the sitting position. But you have to stand. You have to start it standing up. Okay. If your legs stand up at all, like if you're someone who stands up or walks in life, then you have to stand. You have to do takbir al-ihram standing up. And then if you are ill and you have problems, then you can sit down within a. That's for an obligatory prayer. That's for an obligatory prayer, right? For a sunnah prayer, you don't. For a sunnah prayer, you can easily start the prayer sitting down. It's sunnah to start it standing up. It becomes sunnah to start it standing up, but you can do takbirat al-ihram sitting down if it's a sunnah prayer. Okay? This is for an obligatory prayer, like for Isha and Maghrib and Fajr. All right, number 2, saying the inaugural Allahu Akbar, takbirat al-ihram, which is the first one. That's just the first one. The rest of them aren't pillars. So just the Allahu Akbar one. And it's not the movement of the hand, it's just the verbalizing of it. If you can't speak, then that's fine. Then the person who can't speak will just do whatever they do as a substitution. Some people will just move someone who can't speak will just move their tongues. Others will do sign language instead. That's all fine. But the movement of the hands is not the rukn. It's just the verbalizing of Allahu Akbar, that is. Reciting al-Fatiha. Al-Fatiha is the rukn. And then 4 and 5 are bowing, so ruku', and rafi', sami Allahu liman hamida, rising from it. Prostrating on the 7 limbs. We said the 7 limbs, your feet, right? What else? Your knees, your hands, those are 6, and then your forehead with your nose. And they put them together. Rising from the prostration, so sitting, coming up from the prostration, and then sitting between the 2 prostrations, having the proper julus. So it's not just enough to rise, you also have to stay. I don't know if you've noticed, some people come up really quickly and go down, like they barely give it any time. So that's why he emphasizes this piece a little bit. You actually have to give it appropriate time. So some people, if you pray, and I think that Hanafis have a little bit of, because they don't see it's a very quick, they don't see the jalsa to be a rukn tawil, it's a rukn qasir. So, but even the way that some of the Hanafis do it is not according to the Hanafi madhab. Like it's way too quick. Like there is a certain timing for it that should be offered. But that's something I'll argue with you in a Hanafi course later. Reposing in everything. Reposing is tuma'nina. Tuma'nina means just being calm, giving it time. So be careful when you're praying not to be on the move at all times. You're not on the move at all times. You have to be. It's like when you're. The example I give is when you come to an all stop. What is it called? A 4-way stop, right? So what we usually do on a 4-way stop, you can't do in salah, where you hit the brakes and keep on going. No, you have to come to a full stop, right? So you know how you come to a full stop at a 4-way stop? Imagine every movement of salah needing the same thing. So, subhanallah, Allahu Akbar, a full-way stop is when I give it time. This is not a full-way stop, right? Even though I actually arrived there, I didn't repose. I didn't stay there for a couple of seconds. So you have to stay there for every movement requires that tuma'nina. The final tashahhud and sitting for it, the final one, the one that after you say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, is the one he's talking about, not the one in the middle, not the first one in Dhuhr, Asr, or Maghrib, or Isha. Sorry. So the final tashahhud and sitting for it, so saying it and sitting for it, supplicating for the Prophet ﷺ in the final tashahhud. So saying Tahiyyatulillah at the end and saying Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad at the end, those are seen as arkan, and sitting for that is seen as a rukn. So this is for the last one. Which is different for the Shafi'is. Shafi'is don't see Tahiyyatulillah to be a rukn, but the Hanbalis do. Maintaining the order, obviously doing it all in order is a pillar, a rukn for the Hanbalis. And then the closing, Assalamu alaikum, which is the first one. The first one is the rukn. So once you say Assalamu alaikum, you're out of prayer. Wa rahmatullah is extra. And then Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah is extra. It's the first one that causes you to leave prayer. So if you're done. So if you're praying behind me or behind someone, and they say Assalamu alaikum, you can do salam. Even if you do yours before he does his second. Like if I'm like one of those imams who has all the time in the world and is in a hurry for nothing, so I'm Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and you're already done your Assalamu alaikum, so I can left, you're fine. Because once I say Assalamu alaikum, my prayer is over. I'm finished. This is just an extra. This is sunnah. I'm doing something extra. So as long as you don't do the Assalamu alaikum, the first one before I finished mine, then you're fine. But if you finish your second one before I finish mine, that's fine, because they're not rukn. You just have to make sure that your rukn comes behind the imam's rukn, not before it. But the sunnahs if you do before is fine. Just as an FYI, if you ever run into this. Or if you're praying behind a husband who is reading Surah Al-Baqarah and there's something burning on the stove and you quickly want to get out, then that's something you can the ladies can use, or a child is screaming. So wajibatuha. Wajibat. So wajibat are different than arkan, right? For the Hanbalis. For the Shafi'is, they had a different terminology. The Shafi'is, they use different terminology. They say arkan and sunan. And for them in salah, if anyone attended my Fiqh Shafi'i course, I explained that sunnah for the Shafi'is in salah equals wajib for the rest of the 3 madhahib. And then the word hay'ah for the Shafi'is in salah is equal to the word sunnah for the rest of the madhahib. Just to confuse us a little bit more, the Shafi'is decided to come up with a different terminology for salah. But for the Hanbalis, as the rest of the schools of jurisprudence, so like the Hanafis and the Malikis, they have arkan, which are things that you cannot miss. If you miss them, you have to go back and do them. You can't just say, oh, I forgot, I'll do it. No, you have to go back. So if I miss one of the 2 sujoods, or I miss the jalsa, I don't do it at all, or I miss ruku', or I miss al-Fatiha. Right? I have to go back and do those things. I can't just keep on going. Yeah. You have to repeat your salah because whatever comes after is. So when you miss a rukn, you have to go back and get it, and you don't have to continue from it per se, but that rak'ah, for that rak'ah, when you go back, you have to continue for that rak'ah at least. So if I miss, for example, the ruku' in the first rak'ah, right, and I did 3, and I remembered I missed it, then I have to go back and do a full. I have to get that rak'ah back. I don't have to repeat the whole prayer. I have to repeat that rak'ah specifically that I missed the ruku' in. Yeah, so at the end, before I do salam alaikum rahmatullah, I have to get up and do that last one, do it again. Wajibat are not like that. Wajibat are different. Why? So what's the difference? Wajibat, if you miss them, then you don't have to go. You can't go back and do them. You're not allowed to go back and do them. Going back and doing them will invalidate your prayer. So you don't go back and do them. You just do sujood as-sahw for them, which we'll talk about very soon, right? The rukn, you have to go back and do them, and sujood as-sahw, right? Rukn, if you miss a pillar, one of the 14, then you have to go back and get it done and do sujood as-sahw at the end, which we'll talk about sujood as-sahw in a few slides or next week. A wajib, if you miss it, then you just do sujood as-sahw for. You don't go back and do it. If you go back and do it, it will invalidate your salah. Missing both of them voluntarily, like just not doing them, will cause your prayer to be invalid. I'm talking about missing them by mistake. You forgot. But if you decide not to do them, right, voluntarily, consciously, you lose your salah immediately. So for the rukn and wajib, what they have in common is that if you decide not to do them voluntarily, then you tubtil salatak. If you forget the rukn, you have to go back and do it, and sujood as-sahw. The wajib, you just do sujood as-sahw. Okay, now I'll explain this a few more times to make sure you have it clear, and that will be on the exam for sure. I'm going to give you a scenario for sure. 100%. I'm going to give you a rukn and a wajib, and make sure that you tell me what's going to happen. If you make a mistake, I will fail you the course. You have to know how to do this. It's important because it's important for your salah. We pray here by the Hanbali madhab, by the way, which is why the way I pray is the Hanbali madhab by far, like for sure. And you'll see that as we go along because so not because we're a Hanbali masjid. It's just, anyone know why? Who knows why? Yeah. It's the haram. The haram is its own madhab. People have been watching the haram forever, and they go do the tarawih there, and they go do hajj there. They love it. So people who don't know how to pray much, don't have aren't educated in the madhab, then the easiest thing is for them to pray based on what they see on TV, right? Which is the haram, and the haram prays according to the Hanbali madhab. I don't do it because I think it's superior to the rest of the madhab. I just do it because it's much easier for people to follow. They're used to it. So, for example, I don't recite Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim out loud. I don't give time for Fatiha afterwards. Almost all the movements and all the are according to how the Hanbalis basically do their salah. And again, another reason is I was educated when I was a kid, when I learned how to pray in Saudi Arabia. And the first madhab I learned was the Hanbali madhab. And the madhab that I recited the most books in was the Hanbali madhab because I started very, very young, like ridiculously young. I studied Zad al-Mustaqna, I was 7 years old. So these books I studied very, very young. And then the Shafi'i madhab came along later on in my teens. And the Hanafi also followed along in my early 20s. And Maliki madhab, I had to put a lot of effort to learn that because the Maliki scholars don't exist in Syria. Like they're very, very few and scattered. The one person I found was very busy and didn't want to teach anyone anything. So we had to beg him to just recite Abi Zayd and Mukhtas al-Khalid, just to learn the basics from him. So this is how I learned to pray. So I'm much more comfortable just praying how I learned when I was a kid and never changed it. So I learned the other madhab, I never changed it, stayed the way I was doing it as a kid. Because salah is not a problem. However you learn how to pray, pray. Learn a madhab, pray the way the madhab teaches you, you're fine, right? But then, when you come to a masjid, you follow the imam. This is wherever you go in your life. You may be here, one day you'll be in some other country. You follow the imam. You go to a masjid, it's a Maliki masjid. You pray the way everyone else is praying, the way imam is praying. You follow the imam. The imam carries it fully, you don't have to worry about it. Don't come and try to, well, that's not how no, it doesn't matter how you were taught. Either you're an imam, start your own masjid and have people pray the way you pray, or you enter a masjid, you pray the way the imam is praying. And that is a part of understanding the madhab. That even though you may be, for example, Hanafi, or you're a Hanbali, but you enter a masjid and they're a Shafi'i masjid, you pray the way they do it. You pray like them. This is the basics of understanding the adab of what madhab are. So the imam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put him in my purpose in this masjid, لِيُؤْتَمَّ بِهِ, so that you can follow. So that there's a way to unify the work, right? So there's 4 options. 3 are going to be upset. right? There's 4 options. I can't make all 4 happy. Like, it's impossible. It's just not possible. There's going to be three that aren't going to get the way you do it. So I have to make a choice. You have to be okay with whatever it is. Like, I have to, if I'm smart, I'll make a choice that is the easiest for people to accept, and I won't make a choice that's dumb or difficult or rigid and put people in difficulty. But the ma'moom has to have the understanding of their deen that allows them to follow the imam, not just in salah, but almost everything else. Okay, when it comes to zakah, when it comes to hajj, when it comes to jumu'ah, when it comes to Ramadan, and when it comes to hajj, when it comes to all these things, you have to follow the imam. When it comes to the basic fatwa, the norm of the fatwa, you follow the imam. You can't go ahead and you can't be a YouTube guy. Like, you can't have a sheikh on YouTube that you follow. And, well, you're not saying what this sheikh, of course I'm not. Who is this person? I don't know. He didn't educate me. I don't know what you're talking about. You love this sheikh? All right, here's $1,000. Get a ticket and go live where he's living and follow him in his masjid, and then you're happy and we're happy and everyone's happy. You can't do it the other way around. The other way around doesn't work. It's not appropriate. It's actually on the ma'moom, on the follower. This is the fault of a follower. You can't come to a masjid and expect the imam to change to be what you want them to be, or to practice Islam the way you think is correct, unless you are a scholar, meaning you have achieved that level of knowledge where you can actually be the imam, so you can actually challenge this imam's knowledge and say, you're not knowledgeable enough, you need to step aside so I can do this, or start your own masjid, or you follow the imam. And I get this on the minbar. I said, if you are not happy, if you're in a city and all the imams to you are garbage, then you need to move out of that city. I don't say this I'm not saying this in a condescending, rude way. No. I actually mean it to the core of my heart. If you don't like any of the imams in your city, you're obligated to move to a city where you find an imam that you're willing to learn from and you're willing to listen to and follow along. And that's very important for your deen, for your own comfort. And that's why when you come to a masjid, however I'm doing it, you have to play along. Now, if I'm smart, I'll try and do it in a way that is inclusive and try to make sure everyone feels to the best of my ability. But at the end, there's going to be some differences that I have no choice. Either we're going to pray Asr, right, as the Jumhur, or the way the Hanafis do it. I have to do it either this or that. I can't say, well, do it. So I can't cut it in the middle and say, you know what? The Hanafis do it at 7, we do it at 5:35, and I do it at 6:15. No one's happy. And it's not right. It's not an issue of just making people happy. It's also doing things based on valid opinions, right? Valid opinions. What I'm trying to say is that there are different valid opinions. It's not always just one, especially when it comes to rituals. It's not just one valid opinion. There's multiple valid opinions. It's fine. You can choose one. Actually, that's what I'm trying to teach you. Here, choose one. But that opinion may not be the opinion followed in your masjid. That's okay. It's not on you. And you are obligated to follow the imam with that opinion, even though you carry a different one in your personal practice. Even in your salah, you pray a little bit differently. You pray the way the imam. Like if it's a Hanafi masjid and they don't say Ameen out loud, then you don't be the person who comes to the masjid and yells out Ameen every time he says Al-Dhalleen. No, you stay quiet like they do. When you pray alone at home, you can go ahead and do it differently. When you're praying in a masjid, you follow the way the imam does it. This is very, very important. I cannot emphasize this point enough. Because I've seen, I'm watching, and this is a problem. This basic etiquette of understanding what the imam is for, this doesn't exist. Now, the imams have to be inclusive. They have to be smart. They have to make right choices. We try. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us, inshallah, to make those choices. But as a follower, as a ma'moom, you have to have the etiquette and the adab of knowing how to do that. Learn. Educate yourself. But then whoever the imam is, follow along with the imam. And that's just to emphasize the importance of the concept of imamah when it comes to the deen and how the deen functions. So I'll end with that, inshallah, because it's Maghrib. We will talk about the wajibat. You understand what the wajib is now. I explained to you what it means. We'll start talking about what they are and how to kind of deal with certain scenarios, inshallah. Because I want to be fresh, because wajibat are important. I'm gonna tell you the question is going to be on the exam. I'll tell you this is what I'm going to ask you about, and if you don't get it right, I will fail you immediately, because I'm asking you. I'll explain to you what the wajib is. I'll give you the scenario. I'll tell you what to do 2 or 3 times. It's going to be on the exam. If you get it wrong, that's it. Like, you have to know this, because certain things are very, very, they're going to happen to you in your life at least a couple of times, so you should know how to deal with it within this madhab, and other madhab are very similar to this as well. So we'll end with that. So, alhamdulillah.